Hi, this is Graphically Alex coming at you with all things fat related. If that's something that interests you, please subscribe. I'd love to have you. Oh my gosh, I couldn't even talk. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and do this little episode. This is about, I cannot pronounce it. And anhedemia and anhedonia. Oh my gosh, I probably sound so stupid. But basically, what it has to do with is low dopamine or not having any pleasure in life, etc., etc. Which I want to talk about this because this is something that can happen with weight loss, period. It's not exactly Ozempic related, in my opinion. It is something I have experienced very, very often throughout my downsizing journey, and it has to do with the dopamine issues that I've talked about a lot. Particularly in March, I had it really bad, and I'm currently having it a little bit now too. It's not as bad, but it's it's tough. I've told you guys on the channel, serotonin's going up as I'm increasing my food intake. And so that can cause a perception of feeling like dopamine is lower. It can cause a numbed sense of pleasure, but it also causes less of an appetite, which, yeah, you know. So I think that my opinion is this primarily happens within people that have a toxic ritualistic past, particularly hinge. It's going to be extremely relevant because when you are in that hinge cycle, you fry those pathways in the brain. And so when you stop doing that, they're particularly sensitive. But I think it can still affect people that haven't had that issue, but maybe just to a much lesser extent. But when we're looking at people who are taking Ozempic, a lot of them taking it for weight loss, they either A, have the toxic ritualistic still going on, or B, have a deep history with it that they call food noise, which to me, food noise is essentially toxic ritualistic. I haven't seen any physical basis for it. It seems to be completely mental. So I'm not going to separate it. I'm not going to hold your hand when I say this. No, I'm not going to hold your hand when I say this. But if you're talking about food noise, you probably have an ED. That's what that is. Because there's no physical, people don't talk about it. It's like, I just think about it. I just think about it. It's like, okay, you're obsessed. So, but again, within Hinge, there's a huge stigma. People don't want to say that they have it. People delude themselves into saying they don't have it. But I have not seen any physical evidence of food noise. So I think if you're saying that, you probably have a mental illness. Okay? Say that with love, but with truth, and fight it like hell, and don't listen to it. Okay, so let's go ahead and start this.
I don't know if I can pinpoint the exact moment, but I think I started to hear about them kind of like most other people,
Oh, she has some
like
doctor
on the
on
news.
here. I have to block out the beginning because she has copyright music. But there's like some doctor on here with her. I think like a psychiatrist or something like that. So we're going to listen to them talk about it.
News or on the radio when there was these popular, celebrities coming out, talking about them openly. Like I think, like Amy Schumer had talked about being on a GLP-1 and Tracy Morgan and some other. So I was kind of just like, huh, what is this? Maybe it's just some like, celebrity trend. And I didn't really pay much attention to it. The American Academy of Pediatrics had released, new guidelines on addressing pediatric obesity in 2023, and there was a it's a huge document, but there's a section in there that is describing, considering GLP-1s to address um childhood obesity. And so those we started to have conversations at my institution at Georgetown about these guidelines, and that's when I started to do my own reading and research. And then probably on the order of like 6 months later, I started to have patients, as parents themselves wanting to talk to me about some of the mental health implications of GLP-1. So, as their psychiatrist wanting to get my opinion about them being on it as a parent of one of the kids that I'm treating or using it for one of their kids. So I started to get more patients asking me about my opinion from a mental health perspective.
So I'm just going to say this. This is my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. I don't support it at all for kids. Zero. I really, really don't. I don't think you want to mess with the system as your system is growing. You don't want to affect, you don't want, this drug affects your brain. I don't think it's good to put a developing brain through that. I just don't. Um, I don't know why that would be a controversial take, but for some people, maybe it would be. I don't know. I don't agree with it. I just don't whatsoever. I think there can definitely be some psychological interventions if we're talking from a hinge perspective, if a kid has that, or it's something else. I mean, there are other ways. I think it's ridiculous to put a child on it. So, no, I'm totally against it.
Perspective. And that's, something that I, personally I'm working on, like, being more informed about, um, all the risks, benefits, and alternatives in having being able to have a nuanced opinion, and be able to give people sort of full informed consent. And so I felt personally kind of ill-equipped to do that. And I would infer that a lot of other psychiatrists and doctors are having a hard time feeling equipped to do that also. So, I think that's one of the goals that I have for just my own learning and other conversations I'm having about GLP-1s.
While many of his colleagues in the medical community celebrate GLP 1s as quote unquote miracle drugs, Corey isn't convinced. He sees the excitement, but also the blind spots, especially when it comes to children and people already living with psychiatric conditions.
So there's been like a lot of enthusiasm, and I worry that we're sort of underselling some of the risk and kind of over-reporting some of the promise and benefits to families. So that has also like kind of driven a question of mine around, are we overselling the benefits and really under-reporting the risks? And
I
especially
think a lot of the times that is happening because there is a huge financial benefit. I think a lot of times people that promote GLP 1s, they're almost delusionally blind to the fact that there is such a financial incentive to push the drug on literally everybody and anybody. And I don't agree with that whatsoever. Like I said, I take a pretty neutral stance on the drug. I have to say that every time. But when I feel like it's overly demonized or overly glorified, then I speak against that statement. I think that it's a very flat thing. I think that it's something that can help in some circumstances. I'm very supportive of it in terms of diabetes. I even had one of you guys, or like, I don't know if they're still subscribed because I had like a bitch attack low key, but I had one of you guys be like, you say diabetic dose like that means something, but it's different for everybody. You stupid GLP-1 pushing dip. A diabetic dose is a subjective term intentionally, essentially stating I would never take the drug with the intention of losing weight. Personally, I never would. Why the hell would I? I clearly didn't need it. I don't want to take on any risk. I don't want to have to deal with, do I have to get off of this or not? I don't want to deal with any of that. I don't want to pay for it. I don't want to take it, And like I said, don't be a freaking pusher. You guys are weird. I don't like that with therapy either. I'm just to be real. I don't like it. Because it's like, don't push it on everybody all the time. It's like, you guys are weird. Anyways, I just don't like that stuff. But you have to like when I think I was just like upset about my life circumstances. And people were like, you need to go to therapy. And I was like, you need to shut the fuck up. Like, I'm not, what am I going to say to a therapist? I'm bored in my life. What the hell is a therapist going to do about that? Well, why do you think you're bored? Because I don't have anything going on. Because all I do is work. Well, why do you do that? Because I need money. And I need to get this weight off. Okay, mystery solved. I mean, what the hell was I supposed to get from a therapist? You know, I think it's dismissive. It's similar with Ozempic too. Like when you guys push it, it's dismissive to the problem. Just take Ozempic. Just take it. Don't deal with any of your psychological issues underlying it. Don't deal with any of your physiological problems. Don't forget about hypothyroidism. Forget about all of that. Forget about anemia. Forget about your fatty liver. Forget about everything. Don't worry about it. Just take a GLP-1. Don't think about your hormones whatsoever. Just take a GLP-1. It doesn't matter what you eat as long as you just eat less. I mean, to me, that is just really stupid. It's very simplistic. It's literally reductive and unhelpful. And like I said, it's that same pushing. It's dismissive. Well, maybe there's something going on. Or maybe it doesn't work for everybody. Again, going to a therapist to tell them that I'm bored. That is so dumb. Why the fuck would I do that? But it's the same thing. Why the hell would I take a GLP-1? I clearly lost all this weight. I don't need to take a weight loss dose. I don't need to. So I don't like it when people push. By the same token, though, I don't like when people judge people for taking it. I don't like when people say that people are going to have horrible issues or whatever. You don't necessarily know that. I don't like when people say nobody should ever take it. I don't agree with that at all either. I don't really agree with Virgie Tovar's take in general. Even with this episode where she's saying the altered dopamine is due to Ozempic, I don't think so. I think that it has to do with actual weight loss. And it has to do with no longer engaging in the toxic ritualistic behaviors. Your brain is not going through that style of stimulation anymore because you're forced to not think about it. Or in the case of Ozempic, your appetite is so suppressed that you're not able to engage with the hinge side as much. Although some people still can, because some people will still push to do it, which is something that is also not acknowledged and that people also lie about. So when you have never had this issue and you hear people talking about how amazing Ozempic is, you need to understand that they could be lying. People lie all the time about this stuff. That's what's frustrating. It's extremely frustrating. And it is kind of like a minefield because people will lie and say that they had no side effects even though they did. And people will lie and say that even unintentionally, and they'll say that this feeling of anhedonia, I don't know how to pronounce it, but the feeling of no pleasure was caused by the drug. It's not. It's caused by not engaging in the toxic ritualistic, which the drug is facilitating you not engaging in it in certain cases, unless if, again, you go way well and beyond, and you'll just push through anyways, which a lot of people will, which is also not acknowledged. So, again, there's so much clouding around Ozempic. That's why I cannot stand the conversations about Ozempic in general because they're typically super unhelpful. And I try to do my best for like at least the interaction between the toxic ritualistic and the quote unquote miracle cure, which it could be anything. Ozempic is just one thing in a pile of other things. So it's not necessarily that I'm specifically targeting Ozempic. It's more so that it is the thing of the moment. And trust, the era will end and there will be something else in the future. It'll just keep going on forever.
For kids, and in my clinical practice, I have a focus on kids that have ADHD and mood disorders. So I have a lot of questions that I think are not that are unanswered around the specific risk to kids who have, pre-existing mood disorders like anxiety and ADHD and major depressive disorder and bipolar, et cetera, et cetera. So some of those like specific questions I think are unanswered, but I think I have there's a broader question around risk and making sure like not to undersell risk to families as we're talking about, you know, informed consent. A lot of my conversations with colleagues have been around, excitement and enthusiasm for some of the emerging research. Um, so I can see how people would draw that conclusion of like, oh, the medical community really appears to be behind this, because there's a lot of research dollars and a lot of research interest, and a lot of enthusiasm. So, but I do think, I would put myself in this category. There's another um, part of the medical community who's deeply concerned, especially with folks who suffer from psychiatric conditions. And my hope is that there's just more and more conversation about that. And I think hopefully there's more and more data coming out around the psychiatric risks, because people are starting to see, um, emergency room visits, psychiatric emergency room visits increase for folks who have been on GLP-1s, and we're starting to see psychiatric patients.
So I feel like what that is, this is my take, okay? Take it for what it is. I have a huge experience of the toxic ritualistic and a lot of depth of knowledge about Hinge specifically. What I think a psychotic break or whatever he's talking about, it has to do with no longer being in the toxic ritualistic at all. And typically, if you're very, very big, you start to perceive internal brain serotonin much more. And that, why is that good or bad? It's not, I mean, it's already elevated, likely because your body is trying to tell you to stop eating. So your body tries to pump your brain full of it to get you to stop eating, but you can't feel the sensation, basically, for different reasons. I have theories. There isn't much research on it, honestly, and unfortunately, we don't have the tools to measure serotonin in the brain specifically. We just don't. They don't really have the ability to do that. So, unfortunately, it is going to be my hypothesis, so to speak. But from what I've experienced and the symptoms, even now of having higher serotonin, like I don't have it as bad right now, but even just a couple hours ago, had very, very, very flushed red cheeks, and low key migraine, nausea. You have like a rigid attitude, a little bit of a rigidity in the way that you think. And you have a lower appetite. It's not all bad though. You also have stronger inhibition. So again, like it's like being sober, right? You have stronger inhibition. You have the ability to say no to food, for example, which I've been totally strict and totally able to do it. So there are benefits to it. And then also you can feel more confident in general. So there are benefits to serotonin, but there's also drawbacks, and especially within the fluctuation, which people don't talk about. So when somebody is really, really fat, if they're super morbidly obese, they have a toxic ritualistic past or a fatty liver, for example, or the combination of the two, which a lot of people that are going to be on these drugs are going to have all of that. Then what happens is you start to perceive higher serotonin in the brain that's likely already elevated. I don't know if it's because of tolerance. I don't know. It's really, really weird, but it happens. And so I think what's happening is they're perceiving that, and it's making them feel crazy. I had some crazy experiences in 2023. I felt so insecure because if it's too high, you start to feel insecure. You start to feel paranoid a little bit. I had an experience where I was walking up the stairs in this place, and it's like I saw myself outside of my body. I had like this crazy, like dissociative episode. It was only one time though, but it did happen and it was really weird. And people talk about that when it comes to serotonin. You have these weird experiences with it. I felt extremely depressed in 2023. Very, 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 very hopeless and depressed due to this feeling of serotonin. Um, and it's, again, and it's like I was talking to people about it. I was even talking to you guys about it at the time. But it's like all my family would tell me is, I think you need to get on a pill. You need to get on a pill. And I was like, those pills, they just have serotonin in them. It's just going to make it worse. It's just going to make it fucking worse. I know what this is, you know? So it's like, it's tough because I could tell at the time, that was 2023. That was when my appetite, it completely cemented, and it shocked me because I had never felt that before. And I wasn't on Ozempic, but my appetite was locked. I could not eat a lot of food anymore. And it freaked me out at the time because I had this perception that I had control over my weight completely before that time. And I realized that spring and summer of 2023 that I could not go back. There was no going back, basically, because I didn't have the eating issue, you know, I didn't have the toxic ritualistic anymore, and I was never going to do that to my brain again. But I think that that's what people are experiencing. And what I'm telling you is that that is not related to Ozempic. That's related to the obesity, and that's related to ceasing the toxic ritualistic from a severe perspective. It's also what caused my identity crisis because it was so in flux. My inner voice, the way that I thought, was changing, which is really scary. So it's tough, you know. So that's what I think is happening when you're on Ozempic. You can't control the pace. You can't go slower. You can't. And so it's really hard. And again, people don't talk about that because I don't know, it's completely ignored or something. But now with this Ozempic conversation, I'm hearing about these stories of people that are having these feelings. I told you guys, I didn't think I could have taken Ozempic because even being off of it, I had such insane, like, my brain was like going crazy on it. Like just from that perception of the serotonin that I was like, I don't know what the hell I would have done. I probably would have started sleepwalking or something. Like it's really weird. It like affects your relationship with sleep wake. Like I had a couple moments where I did something in my sleep and it's just weird. But again, most people will never feel that. It has to do with the toxic ritualistic, being super morbidly obese, et cetera, likely a fatty liver connection as well. There's just so many different things that lead. There has to be so many layers for it to be that bad. But you're seeing it a lot with Ozempic. And that's why. So it isn't the drug. All I'm trying to say is that is not the drug. That is the issue in and of itself, and that is getting out of the toxic ritualistic or not doing the cycle. This is why people feel like they're going to die if they stop. So it's that weirdness. It's very odd. But, you know, all I can tell you is if you get out of super morbid, it starts to quell, then you're just kind of depressed when you're tortured. When you're tortured you're just depressed all the time, but it's more stable. And then you get to obese, and then you're just really moody. And then mid, you guys know how that went. So that depends on the person, though. But it just becomes less relevant. But that super morbid obese phase of losing, it's really, really crazy. So just understand, like, you fried your brain. And your brain has to heal. That's what that is. So what were some of the benefits of that? for one, I got my shit together. I stopped acting crazy. Prior to that, in 2022, I was really crazy that year. Like, I did not care about, like, my reputation was really bad because I didn't care about how I acted at all. And, like, I don't regret it necessarily because I just had to let everything out in order to not do, in order to not hinge at the time, like as a part of my hypothyroid recovery and as a part of my toxic ritualistic recovery, I had to just let it all out at the time. So I don't regret it. Sorry, I had to sneeze. But the point is, all that serotonin activating in the brain in 2023, it forced me. I felt so shamed and so like nervous of how other people saw me that it forced me to get my shit together, and I started acting appropriately. And because of that, I was able to be taken more seriously as an activist, and it actually helped my career. And it helped me to stabilize within my work and to a certain extent with other people in my life too. So I don't regret it. It was something that had to happen. It's kind of like it's like, I told you guys, it's really similar to alcoholism. This part is, but it is like becoming sober. It doesn't feel good. You feel ashamed. You think about all the things you did prior. You think about all that stuff. It haunts you. You feel like nobody likes you. All that stuff. You have a feeling of very low self-esteem and all these things. It's because it's like it's too high. Because your brain is numb to it. And then as you lose, then you have other issues. So like when you get to a vanity weight era, then your serotonin actually goes down with restriction, which that can open up the mind. If especially if you're very deep, then it can kind of open up the mind and all this stuff. And then you can think about all these things super, super deeply, but you can become less structured and you care less about what other people think and things like that. And that's why people on the reductive side of the toxic ritualistic, they will have a hard time eating more because their serotonin goes up, which one of you guys pointed out in my comments that high serotonin there's a connection with people having high serotonin in the reductive side of the toxic ritualistic. So Anna. And I think that that's why. So it's because when you start to eat more, which is what I'm going through now, then your serotonin goes up, which I don't feel ashamed because it was low. So now it's coming back in and I feel more confident. I feel more structured. I feel more rooted in reality. But I also have a little bit of anhedonia. Like a little bit of creative bankruptcy and a little bit of boredom, if that makes sense, because it makes your dopamine seem low in response. So that would actually be my advice for somebody who's reductive. Really look at dopamine foods and really, really incorporate them in your diet. It will help that serotonin, because it's not that you want it to be low. You don't. You want it to be what it needs to be. So it's kind of like, just get your dopamine up too, because your dopamine's probably really low if you've been overly reductive because you don't have the building blocks. It's similar to being hypo. You don't have the building blocks. You need nutrition to make these hormones. I know I'm going on too long of a tangent, but again, I'm still in a deficit in the vanity weight. So I go really, really deep all the time. And I'm sorry if it annoys people. I kind of wish I could be more focused, but it's annoying me personally, but it is what it is. We're here. I showed up. Okay. All right, let's continue.
Patients take GLP-1s also and don't really have a full understanding of the risk. There are my understanding is there's a lot of.
I forgot to say too. This will have an interaction with ADHD as well. So I don't know if I don't have ADHD, but I would question if somebody who has ADHD would be a good candidate for Ozempic because of this too, because it can be too out of control. So again, for some people, a drug can be the answer, But for a lot of people, it's not, because we're all at different places. I told you guys, from a toxic ritualistic perspective, Ozempic is not the best, especially if severe. If it's more mild, maybe it'll work. I can buy that. I can see why, because it maybe it can just force you not think about it. Well, that might be enough for somebody who's more mild. But if you're very severe, you're going to have these brain changes, and it's really a lot. Okay. So again, there's all these different shades, and I think ADHD would probably interact with it. So you need to think about it, or like think, is this going to work? Or, oh my gosh, I feel unbelievably depressed on this drug. Why? Well, maybe it is the ADHD. Like maybe it does not work for you because of that. It's just a question. I'm not saying it is or isn't, or it will or won't. I'm saying that there is no consideration about these interactions. That's what bothers me. And then I see somebody try it, then they say, I couldn't do anything. I was so depressed, or I had no energy, or I was this, I was that. So I couldn't stay on the drug. Well, I guess I'm fat forever, because that's the only answer. That's what I don't want. So that's why I have to talk about this stuff, which people don't want me to. I don't know why. I think because they just want it to be easy. And I think for most people, where maybe they're, class 1 obese, they don't have a toxic ritualistic past, they're diabetic or pre-diabetic or something, it can really be helpful. So it's like, I don't want to ignore the vast blanket of people who it's super helpful for too. I don't want to do that either, because I believe those people too. But I think that it is such an individual thing, and it needs to be considered. And that's not even considering the financial side of it, but that's a whole other discussion. But I'm talking about just the physical realities of different types of people. It's not going to work for everybody, but it will work for a lot of people, which is why I'm neutral.
Of post-marketing surveillance that the FDA do and some other groups do around folks reporting side effects after the medicines hit the market. So my hope is that as more and more data comes out, we'll be able to have more of a
Yeah, it's very
specific
early.
conversation around risk. So some of it is just ongoing, and we have to kind of wait for the research to come out. But I think the trends are really concerning around the disregard for psychiatric risk.
I
So
agree.
my hope is that more of the medical community gets attuned to that.
This season, we've talked about
Okay, hold
populations
on.
who can be at higher risk for adverse effects
Oh, never
from
mind.
GLP-1s from or at risk.
I thought she's about to do an ad. I'm like a hot mess today, by the way. I'm like a hair away from a migraine right now, so I'm a little weird. But I literally was having one last night. Like, I'm really going through it, you guys. I really am. So I'm doing my best here. But I'm running on, I don't even know what I'm running on. I'm running on my serotonin changing on me. And all I can do is just tell you so that you know if that's happening to you too, which it won't happen to everybody. But if you're real deep for a long time, it might happen, so you're not crazy. I just want you to know you're not crazy. Okay? I thought she was going into an ad read. Let me go back a little bit. Okay.
My hope is that more of the medical community gets attuned to that.
This season, we've talked about populations who can be at higher risk for adverse effects from GLP-1s because they are recovering from or at risk of acquiring an eating disorder, and those who are at higher risk for adverse effects because they experience weight stigma and therefore undue pressure to lose weight rapidly. But I wanted to learn more from Corey about how GLP-1s are affecting people with pre-existing psychiatric conditions. To explain the stakes, he points back to one of the most important studies in medical history, the Minnesota starvation experiments.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things come up for me. So, when I was thinking about these, what you're alluding to, these special considerations for certain communities, especially for folks who have underlying psychiatric vulnerabilities. the I was thinking about the Minnesota starvation experiments. Have you heard about these?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So, for your audience, this was like, one of the first studies that really looked at the impact of extreme caloric restriction. And in connection to, now in connection to eating disorders like anorexia is one of the foundational studies. But basically, to summarize it, back in the 1940s, there was World War II going on, and the sort of Allied troops were liberating the concentration camps and encountering folks who had been subject to starvation. And so there was an interest in the scientific community around what does starvation do to people physiologically and psychologically, and then how do we safely rehabilitate them and refeed them? And so about 36 or so healthy controls, otherwise young, healthy men in and around the University of Minnesota area who were conscientious dissenters against the war had agreed to participate in this really extensive study where essentially they were subject to a starvation diet for 6 months. And so they were closely researched in terms of their physiology and psychology, and were subject to like a battery of tests for months at a time. And one of the things that came out was that, these men were obviously, after the starvation part of the study, were in really ill health. So they were anemic and had all kinds of metabolic derangements and metabolic.
Anemia. It's a thing. Diet culture vampirism. By the way, an update. Look at my face. I have color. I'm getting better. And I'm still in a deficit. I'm getting better. So, just saying, treat it. Take your anemia seriously. Separate your foods. Separate it. Gosh, 2-hour gaps, people. Anyways, you need to take it seriously or it won't go away. Anyways, let's continue.
Metabolic problems, but also that for a lot of them, their personality actually changed. So many of them were sort of apathetic and fatigued and irritable and weak. And so the restricted diet sort of fundamentally kind of changed their mood and personality. And so it was one of the first studies that showed that, you know, particularly diet restriction in and of itself can change your mood and change your personality, and personality characteristics. So
It's
when
true.
I think about like the
I've talked about that all throughout my journey, much to the dismay of a lot of people because they couldn't stand it when I talk about it. But it does happen. It does. Some of it is temporary, but a lot of it, that's where those arrows come from. Because when you're at different sizes, it affects you differently, basically. That's where a lot of that came from. And like even just being in vanity weight, a deficit hits so different, especially a very deep one. So like a 2 pound per week deficit, that hits so different. On Thursday of this week, I'll be at 1 pound per week. And already like I'm like 1.2 right now. My hair isn't falling out anymore. It wasn't really falling out that much, but it still was a little. I'll have to talk about that on my health update, but that was something. The anemia, it's really getting better, but I have been taking an iron pill for 3 months. So that makes sense. So that might be unrelated to the deficit because I was treating it months ago, and I plan on taking another 3-month pill bottle, basically, that I have to build up my stores and still continue to eat more iron-rich foods throughout the next 3 months to try to get even better. I think I'm still anemic. It's just not so severe that I'm pale. The vampirism is going away. And then I have much more energy. And I'm still in a deficit. I'm just in a shallower one. So it's like that's a difference too. It's like, okay, how deep is it? How much do you weigh? And that's what you have to think about because it's going to be different. And then your size in general, the amount of fat you have on you, it will create those trends or eras, so to speak, and you can shift. And then now that it's ending, I feel like I'm just going back to who I was before I even lost weight, which is a weird feeling. but it's happening. Which the biggest thing is just I'm super introverted. I'm like, holy shit, I'm really introverted. And I had that fake extrovert era when my dopamine was low, and it's totally over. So that's a trip.
The risk of GLP-1s for psychiatrically vulnerable populations, that comes to mind for me. And again, we could talk more about this, but the data is becoming more and more concerning that there is a major risk or an increased risk with GLP-1s, particularly for major depression, anxiety, and suicidal behavior. So I think that it's a core part of the consideration that people need to have for themselves, for adults, and for their children around what are my pre-existing psychiatric.
Again, is it the reduction, or is it the state of being there and the toxic ritualistic and the damage that you've done to your brain? I think it's that, because you can be hella depressed when you're not even losing weight at that size. Also, you can be anemic when you're super morbidly obese. It's so easy. Your body has a hard time absorbing iron the more obese you are. So it's like all of these issues can still happen within super morbid obesity as well. And you have to remember too, you have digestive issues, so you can have a lot of nutrient deficiencies very easily when you're super morbidly obese. That can lead to depression and things as well. Like, there's a lot of issues with being that big, and if you're in that position, you're gonna have to wrestle to get out. I know that people don't want to hear that, but it's very hard, and even if you take Ozempic, it's still gonna be really hard. So I mean, it's up to the person. I just think for me personally, the psychological effects were so strong, and I'm so like emotional and everything, that I never could have handled taking Ozempic for weight loss. Never. And I would never do it. And I think that has to be acknowledged, that there's a lot of people that this will not work for. And it has a lot to do with being able to control the pacing. So like for me, I could, for example, take a break from weight loss in 2023. If I was on Ozempic at a weight loss dose, I wouldn't be able to. So then what would happen? You get me? So I could deal with it for a while, then stop, then deal with it for a while, then stop, and then it kind of ebbed and flowed, and it was okay, and I got out. But it's people don't understand that it's very hard. It is tough. So, yeah.
Psychiatric vulnerabilities and risks. And I think it's reasonable to assume that with some confidence that being on a GLP-1 will induce some caloric deficits and starvation states, and that is likely to increase your risk for mood problems, especially if you already have like an underlying predisposition.
Again, if you can't control how deep you're going in a deficit, that can be a problem. It can definitely be a problem.
In other words, GLP-1s affect how much you eat. How much you eat affects your mood. And if you have a pre-existing psychiatric condition, how much or...
Yes, but overeating all the time is probably why a lot of these people have elevated serotonin in the brain in the first place. And just because your brain starts to perceive it again doesn't mean that it wasn't already there because you were overeating all the time. Fun fact, eating raises serotonin. So if you're overeating all the time, it's going to be too high. Okay? Hope that helps.
In this case, how little you eat could have major implications for your mood.
Can go both ways. Just saying, if you overeat, it'll cause problems too.
Food. I have to point out, Corey is the only interview I've done for the podcast so far where he just straight up says that GLP-1s induce the S word. That is starvation. Let me tell you from personal experience, Corey is not prone to exaggeration or hyperbole. He is very intentional and thoughtful about language. So, when Corey calls something starvation, it means it satisfies the clinical definition of starvation. I'll admit, even I sometimes shy away from that word, feeling like it maybe sounds quote unquote too extreme or quote unquote too judgmental. So,
Well, in my opinion, there are different versions of it. Like, obviously, there is a caloric version, duh. But also, if you're extremely nutrient deficient, then there is an element there as well. Like, for example, iron deficient anemia, in my opinion, it may not fit the definition, but it's at least similar to starvation. And you can be super fat and have that. But it's because you don't have iron or you're not eating any iron, or it's because your body can't absorb it. So it's like that's still a problem. So again, these issues also happen in supermorbid obesity, which is what Virgie does not want to acknowledge at all, and she won't. So again, it's really bad to be that big. It can be difficult to lose with the GLP-1 from that size and with that past if you cannot control the pacing. That's the issue. That is really the problem in a nutshell. You have to, for some people, they must be able to control the pace. And I mean like full on control. Other people, maybe they're fine, you know? And certainly if you're not as big, it's probably like not a big deal. Or you're probably fine. Even just from a morbid perspective, it's probably not that bad. You might be depressed on that Ozempic, but you're not going to feel like totally nuts, you know? I don't know how else to describe it, but a lot of you guys have never been that big, so I can't it's like trying to tell you what color the sky is when you've never seen it before, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard to explain it.
just to clarify, just so I was 100% sure, I circled back with Corey and asked him, when it comes to how GLP-1s operate, is the word starvation an extreme or inaccurate description of what's happening to a person?
No, I don't think that's too far of a stretch. No, I mean, in combination with, the feelings of early satiety or satisfaction that people are reporting, the nausea that many people are reporting, the slowed gastric emptying, that happens as a normal part of the mechanism of action. People are eating smaller meals and are eating less. And if you are eating, less than your daily recommended intake, which, for the average person, is like 2,000 calories, you're subjecting your body to chronic states of caloric deficits, which I think it's not a stretch to call that starvation. So I think it's fine, it's fine to use that terminology.
Corey went on to explain that when we think of the word starvation, we might think of a person who is eating literally nothing. It's not that simple, though. In order for your brain to go into a starvation state, you just have to consistently be in a state of caloric deficit. I wanted to know why exactly starvation states might worsen psychiatric.
No, she's wrong there. So you can get there with nutrient deficiencies. But if you're really fat, then your body uses the fat. Especially when you're very big, your body will use the fat on you to make up for those calories. So it's not actually struggling calorically. It takes quite a while for you to struggle calorically. You have to be pretty lean, put to you that way.
Symptoms. Corey explained how GLP-1s affect the brain's reward system and what that means for people already living with depression or anxiety.
I think that kind of it speaks to the physiology of starvation. And there's a complex cascade of hormones that regulate, both the hormones that regulate our appetite and eating also connect to our mood. Um, and they've seen this primarily with dopamine regulation in the midbrain, which is like our reward center. It's the part of the
Been talking about this the whole time I've been losing weight. I'm glad to know I agree with him on this.
brain that kind of makes us feel good with our different activities. And what they've shown that when folks are in starvation states, essentially those pathways, those dopamine pathways in the midbrain become dysregulated and become dampened. So
Low dopamine era. So those are going to particularly happen, in my opinion, in a small fat, like Ozempic, obesity class 1, and within the mid-size era. Those are the two biggest times that occurs. There's a little bit of it in a vanity weight era, but it's not that much. It's kind of overblown. Because I did get a little bit restless, but it wasn't that bad. I was restless in the tortured era as well, so it did happen in that era too. But you just have so much going on that it's like, psh, low dopamine, psh, I got all this other crazy stuff going on, so I don't even think about it. You know what I mean? There's just a lot going on. If you're going through a tortured era with that morbid obesity, that it's not even like the top of your list. But as you get to just class 1, then it becomes the top of your list. And how does it register? Lack of motivation. You know, I think a lot of people hear dopamine dysregulation. Oh my gosh, it's the worst thing ever. No, only when you're super morbidly obese, yes. But I wouldn't even say that that's necessarily dopamine related. It has to do with serotonin. It's the same thing with when you're climbing out of a deficit from a vanity weight perspective, but that's more controlled and it's more slow and steady, whereas it can get kind of out of control when you're super morbid. And those psychological pressures can make somebody feel like they're forced to eat a lot, because you have to eat a lot to stop losing when you're that big too. It's really difficult. It's a very, very difficult phase. I've told you guys that all the time. It's the hardest to lose at that size. The hardest. Do not ever get there. Please, for the love of God, do not ever get there. It is so much harder to get out of that because of that. But the other phases, you know, my low dopamine era, had a fake extrovert era. I was okay. You know, I was going to get through it, and I did. And the dopamine started regulating even in a deficit towards this summer. So it's very obesity related too, which again, he needs to acknowledge that obesity causes issues with dopamine in and of itself, which I don't hear that conversation either. So again, I never want you to think that I'm talking negatively about a GLP-1 and somehow promoting fatness. No way in hell. You know, I totally get it. So anyways,
going back to like those original Minnesota starvation experiments, they found that those patients became apathetic about their lives and didn't derive the same joy from the activities that they used to enjoy, which is one of the primary criteria for major depression.
low
Is
dopamine.
anhedonia, which is that state of not getting rewards from things that you used to find enjoyable. So being in
Yeah, but I wasn't depressed. Like when I was in March, I was in my mid-sized princess era. I had tons of anhedonia. I literally had no pleasure at all. But I wasn't depressed. I was angry. So just because you have anhedonia doesn't mean that you're depressed. Anhedonia is a symptom of depression, but having anhedonia doesn't equal depression at all. It could just be your dopamine is fried, basically, which for me, I perceived it, and I think in general, for most people, it'll be right at that gateway to class 1. That's when it's real bad. And so what you'll have is you'll have people that'll be like, well, I want to eat more because I'm bored. And so then they'll eat more, and then they'll kind of maintain, or they'll have a hard time losing in class 1 obesity because they lack motivation. That's how it shows. And again, maybe they aren't having as much pleasure in things. Maybe they are moody. Like I called it my brat era, right? I was up and down. Up and down. I'd be like happy. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. And then I'd be like, I'm really mad. You know, it's kind of like, I love the term brat because it just works so well because it's kind of little kiddish. Like how little kids, they're like happy and then they're like really sad or angry. You know, that's kind of how it registered for me in that era. But in the mid-sized princess, I was just angry. And I'm like, being angry is not depression. Like, I wasn't depressed. I was pissed. I was able to do everything I needed to do. I worked 2 jobs. If anything, I was like workaholic during that era. I even did like daily videos like twice, like in January and in June. So I was like incredibly active during those times, and I wasn't depressed. I was just bitchy and mad, which again, I didn't feel any pleasure. I didn't. So it wasn't pleasant. But was it worth it? Yeah, it was. you know? I kind of liked it. I know it's bad to say, but I like anger. I do. I'm comfortable being angry. I know that that's controversial, but for me personally, it's a comfortable emotion. I don't like being depressed. And I've told you guys when I've been depressed. So I remember back in March, I was like, don't tell me I'm depressed. And I was like, and don't tell me to go to therapy. I was so mad because I'm like, ugh, because I'm like, it's physical and you guys don't believe me. And then here he is, he's saying it. Like, I told you. I get to be smug. That's one thing. Higher serotonin, higher smug. I felt very smug a lot since I started eating more. But again, that's like a confidence thing. It's like I'm smug now. I'm like, Diet Culture Vampire is smug. It's like, I know better than you. That's a Diet Culture Vampire.
In a starvation state increases your risk for that anhedonia. And again, if you have depression, if you have anxiety, if you have suicidal thinking, then that anhedonia is probably contributing to, an increased problem, or an exacerbation of what's already there.
Anhedonia was a new
that.
word for me. After the interview, I looked up the definition. Anhedonia is the inability or significantly reduced capacity to experience pleasure, joy.
By the way, there is a connection between this and the toxic ritualistic, including Hinge, which she will not ever say. Because why would she? That would be too honest. But that's what I've been talking about forever. So if you do this to your brain, you can develop anhedonia because of what you're doing.
Or positive emotions from activities that are typically enjoyable. It is a core symptom of major depressive disorder, MDD. Symptoms can include social withdrawal, decreased interest in hobbies, and a lack of motivation. This is the part of the episode where I'm yet again going to ask us to slow down. Starvation states, like the ones that are induced through GLP-1s, affect brain chemistry, making it harder to feel joy and pleasure from normal human behaviors and activities. I don't know how the culture seems totally okay with putting someone in this state, but I, for one, am
It happens in supermorbid obesity too, but shh, doesn't want you to know that.
not. My final question for Corey was this. Has he ever seen anything in medicine that feels like this GLP-1 frenzy?
When I was doing my medical training in Connecticut, there was a big push for, this was back in like 2015. There was a big push for medical marijuana and legalization. And aside from my own views on that, there was this like cart before the horse scenario where in the state of Connecticut at that time, marijuana became medicalized, meaning people could get access to it with a prescription. The problem is that there was absolutely no evidence that at that time that cannabis is helpful for any psychiatric conditions. And there was a list of psychiatric conditions like PTSD that made you eligible for a marijuana prescription. And I just felt that, you know, people, I had patients coming in asking me for marijuana prescriptions, and that we were not subjecting cannabis to the same like rigors as we would any other medication for a psychiatric condition. So in no other scenario, could there be a
It's interesting.
a medication for depression, and within a year's time, it becomes medicalized in the absence of any evidence whatsoever for psychiatric conditions. So that to me kind of struck me as like the cart came before the horse, and it was really about, the broader politics of cannabis and the broader politics of marijuana. And it was more of a strategy, one political strategy to push recreationalization and decriminalization through a sort of medical strategy. It really wasn't about medicine.
That's it for today's episode of GLP-1.
Okay, I don't want to have any of that music, so I'm going to go ahead and stop it. But thank you guys so much for listening. That one was kind of interesting. Again, I don't think that she handled it at all, which is annoying, but it's not unexpected. But I hope that I was able to give some perspective on it. There were a lot of ideas in this. I know I'm unfocused. I'm sorry. Would you rather me just not post? That's basically how I feel about it. It's where I'm at right now. And I feel like I cannot just talk and just be on point. I feel like I go on all these different rants and stuff. I can't help it. It is what it is. It's where I'm at physically right now. And I just want to stay present. So if that annoys you, I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you. It'll probably be different next year. But anyways, you guys, I will talk to you guys later. Yeah, I'll talk to you later. Bye.